in and of themselves, as well as the army of the state, is an evil, and it is a necessary evil that must be minimized. Thus, the idea of using soldiers as well as conscripting soldiers and recruiting soldiers should be minimized to the greatest extent possible. Secondly, we believe that mercenaries are in fact effective and create more humane and more effective wars as well as interventions. And thirdly, we believe that developing countries specifically benefit the most from this motion. My deputy will be talking about the developing countries point. I will be talking about the first 2 points. Now, what is our stance? Our stance is clear. Number one, mercenaries are better options than soldiers in the vast majority of cases. And even if they're not better than soldiers, even if the state manages to train more qualified combatants, mercenaries can be much better complements to soldiers in most situations. What do we say about our first argument? Firstly, we will talk about why soldiers as a population are in fact a bad option in the vast majority of cases. Number one, soldiers are politicized. What does this mean? Soldiers are citizens of the country that have often been either coerced or forced into their service. And when soldiers die, nation states are often required to report their deaths, and thus they are used to perpetuate wars. For example, when border conflicts happen between India and China, when Indian soldiers die, tensions rise because India is responsible for those soldiers. Same thing in intervention in, say, Afghanistan. When American soldiers are killed by the Taliban, America decides it will continue its war. What does this mean? This means that on our side, nation states are not required to report the deaths and casualties as well as the effective losses of mercenary forces. And that means that they, in fact, receive lesser incentives to perpetuate wars. Now, what is our second point? Soldiers are often coerced or forced into their situation. Why? For two major reasons. Number one, conscription. In places like Republic of Korea, the United States of America, and even Singapore, the vast majority of people who are in the army are conscripted. They do not go there by choice. They are put into either a lottery, or often they are put in there because a significant war is taking place. This means that these soldiers have not been put there of their own choice. But secondly, even if they're not conscripted, they're recruited. And how are they recruited? They're recruited on the point of them coming from poor backgrounds, them being told that soldiery is a glorified occupation, and their psychological lack of focus, especially coming right out of house school, being exploited specifically by recruiters who are told, look for confused individuals and hire them into the military. In this case, we believe that there are two impacts that come from this point. Number one, morally, it is simply morally wrong for a state to use the most vulnerable people that they have recruited into their army in the majority of situations. If this can be avoided, it is absolutely better to put mercenaries on our side. But secondly, even practically, you are less likely to get a motivated and respectable soldier out of people who are being coerced into being in the army because of a lottery, right? You often have to put them in, say, ground troop positions, and you're not going to get the best choice from the population because the best people from the population are probably going to avoid the draft somehow, avoid conscription, and not be recruited in the military, even if it is consensual. That means that mercenaries who choose this occupation as a way to make more money and train themselves are much better. And what is our third point about soldiers? They live in horrible conditions. What does this mean? Number one, the vast majority of military contracts are binding. You cannot leave. This incentivizes militaries to cut as much of their costs as possible because soldiers can't say anything. They can't say, oh, my barracks are in bad conditions, my food have worms in them. Because even if they do, they're just told, this is just how war works. And this means that the more soldiers you have and the more soldiers you send into a war situation, the worse your life becomes for those soldiers. And they don't have an incentive to fix these situations. And the second point is about psychological pressure, which occurs for these soldiers. They're pressured into doing their jobs. They're pressured into doing what they may or may not want to do after being conscripted without, having their conditions put in forth. And the impact of this is, once again, that the more soldiers you use in war, the worse it is, both principally and, of course, morally. Now, before I move on, I would love to take a POI. Sure, whatever. All right. My second substantive is about how we improve war in two ways. We make it more effective, and secondly, we make it more just in terms of humanity. Why do we make it more humane? Number one, mercenaries are more likely to be held to account. Why? They don't have state protection. The vast majority of soldiers believe they have a certain level of impunity because they follow orders from their superiors. So when Operation Condor in South America says, go ahead and commit human rights violations to support dictators, they are not going to be held to account because the vast majority of people commanding them are the ones who are supposed to be holding them to account. The people who send orders from the government are not going to hold their own people to account. This means that human rights violations are more likely to be ignored on side opposition. But secondly, we put under the right of human rights violations. They're used as a sort of sort of like alternative whipping boy by governments, which say that the human rights violations didn't occur from our soldiers, they occurred from the mercenaries. This means that mercenaries uniquely have an incentive to not commit human rights violations, to reduce as much of their culpability as possible in these situations and be as humane as possible. This means that these private firms, which need to, number one, keep their international reputations intact, and secondly, keep their own soldiers alive and well, because that is what gives them their income, are required to be more humane. I have 4 more seconds before protected time. Any POIs? All right, whatever. My second point, mercenaries are simply cheaper to use. Why? Because mercenaries are provided for by private firms. States don't have to pay them as much. Yes, there are significantly expensive contracts, but these contracts pale in comparison to the long-term costs of maintaining a military and then training people who have been conscripted, because the vast majority of mercenary forces are conscripted from, say, police forces that state has already used. In this case, it is training that the state has provided to these individuals, which is being used in a private capacity, which the state is simply ignoring. What does that mean? That means that the state is being much less effective with the way it uses its resources. Simply by the mandate that the vast majority of these people are trained by the state should be perfectly okay using its own trainees in its own wars, but just with more accountability. And thirdly, we talk about the simple fact of wins and losses. When a government loses a war, it is politically held back. That is true. And thus it has an incentive to win. However, mercenaries have to win properly, because if they lose too many lives, if they mess up too many battles, destroy too much of their equipment, then they are going to end up losing business. And that, in conclusion, brings me to my final impact, which is the idea of military spending reducing on our side. This house should absolutely support this motion for a better quality of war and, in fact, a better quality of life for soldiers. Thank you.
Just curious, what are the times for the speeches? 7 minutes, right?
Yeah, time is 7 minutes. Yeah, and if you like, I stop writing at 7 minutes 15 seconds. Yeah. After that, like whatever you say is pointless. Okay. Happy to thank you for your fine speech, and I'd like to invite the leader of opposition to continue the debate.
Okay, do you hear me well?
Yep.
Wait a second, please. Firstly, we don't agree with the presumption that war is necessary all the time. It may be necessary for some reasons, in some situations, but we think that reduction of wars overall will be better for everyone, for international community. And we say that efficiency of the war is not a good thing in and of itself, because it leads to more deaths, more brutality, and more other things that these mercenaries will lead to. So we say that if the war will be less efficient in terms of deaths and brutality, if wars will be so less admired overall, it will be better for international community. So who are the mercenaries? Mercenaries quite often are not the citizens of the state. Sometimes there are some Africans from some African countries because, well, it is easier to hire them. They work for some other country. And even if they're citizens, they go voluntarily. So their main interest is money. So it's not that morally problematic for the government to hire them. And it leads to less responsibility for the state and less reputational risks, because with national armies, government is more responsible because they are citizens and they are rather forced to be involved in the war. And the reason why we face protests in the USA against wars in the Middle East, for instance, is because people understand that maybe not that necessary, and we involved our citizens involved in war, and they dying, and they're not necessarily voluntarily went to this war. Maybe even they are like privately hired within the national army, but still it is not their choice to go to this war unnecessarily. I will take the point of information.
Actually, when you talk about mercenaries being more likely to commit human rights, isn't it more likely for the state to protect citizen soldiers who they cannot distance themselves from, as opposed to mercenaries who they can just end their contracts with?
I don't really get the question. Okay, so because our soldiers are our citizens and they are forced, government is more responsible, and government is more responsible because they fear the outrage from the other citizens in the country that tend to protest because they see that their citizens, their fellows dying in this war that is maybe not necessary. But if these are mercenaries, nobody cares, and war can be as brutal as it wants. So we have an example of like Wagner private organization, a Russian private military organization. They burned Syrian soldiers, cut their legs, hands. So they were quite brutal, and because their efficiency measured by the brutality and the amount of death that they can provide. So yes, we agree to some extent that they are probably more efficient because it's their job, it's what they like and what they get money for. But we think it is not a great thing if we talk about it as a measure of something good. The government is not responsible for these private organizations because it is very hard to prove the connection between this state and these mercenaries. Because again, some kind of organizations like Wagner organizations can commit some horrible crimes, but Russia can say that, well, we are not hired these private organizations, it's not our national army. And on the comparison, if the Russian national army commits some kind of horrible crimes, they will be responsible for that in the international arena. And with this private mercenaries, they have this safe distinction. So this is not the Russia, this is some private organizations. And because of this responsibility, we'll face more brutality on the wars. It means that because the lack of responsibility, it will be harder to find a peace because previously, again, because of protests, because of some other things that happen, because of this responsibility and feel of connection, some wars ended because governments could not stand this pressure from the protests, and they had to admit that, well, it's not efficient, a lot of people dies, and war is not that necessary at this point of time. So we will more likely see more agreements on peace when the national armies, only national armies, will be involved in such situations and such wars. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your fine speech, and let's invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the debate.
Chair, quick question. If we issue POIs through text, are the speakers required to respond to it and say rejected?
Yeah, speakers, please pay attention to the chat. If speaker does not respond to the POI, or not saying that he refuses that, stuff like that, so you can just hold the piece of paper like that, for example.
And also just say point. For me, I just prefer taking my POIs just everyone say point.
Or in cases when speaker just ignores everything, at the end of the speech, at the end of the protected time, not projected time. Like at 5:40, you can ask it audible, like unmute yourself and ask it. Yeah. So maybe for some speakers it's disruptive, right? If you prefer some way of asking POI from others, you can clarify that before your speech, of course.
Yeah. I actually prefer if people could just unmute themselves and say point in case they have a POI. All right, is everyone ready? Panel, recognize that we do not have the luxury of debating whether wars are good or not, because at the end of the day, wars are a political necessity. They are an evil political necessity, but it's still a necessity nonetheless. So what do we do in this world where we cannot end war altogether? We make it more effective. More effective means fewer deaths. More effective means fewer human rights violations. And the only way you get that is when you have fair competition in an economic sense, instead of state monopolies and states protecting their own armies for fear of their own image. Several things I'm going to do in this speech today. Firstly, I'm going to refute everything that came out of the opening opposition case. Then I'm going to get into reconstruction and reanalysis of my partner's two major points. And then I'm going to discuss an after analysis on how mercenaries are actually a better option in developing countries, both when used by intervening forces and as a supplement to national armies in developing countries and non-military powers. Let's look at refutation first, right? What do we get from opening opposition? Firstly, opening opposition directly clashes with proposition's first point on how soldiers actually suffer worse conditions when mercenaries are involved. Several ways. Let's break down some incentives, right? Firstly, recognize that mercenaries allow for free competition within the military contractor market. When you are because of the fact that look at the status quo. The way armies are hired actually constitutes pretty much a monopoly in which the state exercises all power over negotiations with soldiers, over their living conditions, over their assignments, over the structure of military culture in the first place. That is why bad conditions are so prevalent, because when you only have one organization to turn to for employment within the military sector, they don't have an incentive to provide good conditions for you. Whereas if you're going to allow if you have to compete against, whereas with mercenaries, if different companies are competing against each other, it is much more likely that mercenary organizations are going to be offering better conditions to the people they hire in order to gain the most effective contracts possible. Let's look at their second idea, right? The idea that somehow states are going to hold mercenaries less accountable because of the fact that they're able to distance themselves. But here is the exact thing. The fact that states can distance themselves from mercenaries is the exact reason that they're going to be holding mercenaries accountable for crimes committed under the guise of war. Let's look at these two scenarios, right? Why are states so reluctant to prosecute national armies? Because of the fact that the state and the army are so inextricably connected that when the state prosecutes its armies for violating human rights, they're literally admitting a fundamental flaw within their own military culture, which is an image that they do not want to be projecting for their citizens. But when they hire mercenaries, they're able to distance themselves. They're able to say, that is not us. We're willing to hold them accountable because at the end of the day, recognize, panel, that states are much more likely to hold accountable people who are not directly under their employment, who are not directly related to them by being directly employed by them. Let's do some reanalysis by partners' points, right? Firstly, on the idea of how soldiers are better treated, because of the fact that people are in better positions inherently when they are able to when they have multiple options to turn to, when they're able to enter contracts under their own will instead of being coerced into it, right? We see that mercenaries are often hired from positions where they are already secure in life. Mercenaries tend to be better trained. They tend to be hired from police academies and they tend to be better paid because of the fact that there's competition within that market. that creates the best conditions possible for soldiers, right? But also let's look at the idea of effective war, because this is where side opposition is really going to lose its debate today, is because of their characterization as effective war as being inherently as being somehow bad. In fact, effective war is actually the better option in all cases, because effective war means fewer deaths from the people who are from belligerents, and fewer human rights violations from places in which the war is occurring, because of the fact that there's an incentive for mercenaries to maintain a certain kind of image and to be as effective as possible, to be economically competitive. Before I move on to my own point, I'd like to take a point of information. No point of information. Let's move on to my own point on how it's better for developing countries. Two analyses under this, right? Firstly is the idea of logistical effectiveness within developing countries, and second is the idea of partisanship within developing of partisanship and political ties to developing countries. Let's look at the way that armies are structured within developing countries, right? In developing countries, it tends to be that armies tend to be weaker in developing countries, just largely because of the way that the economy and the government is structured in the first place. There is less incentive to develop. Oftentimes, developing countries lack the ability to create effective training programs for their soldiers. Therefore, they should be outsourcing their training. Second of all, is the idea that actually within developing countries, the second idea under this is actually the way more important one, because of two sub-analyses under partisanship that I will explain. Firstly, is the idea of political ties, because in any case, developing countries are often outsourcing their training to other organizations. This looks like countries with relatively minimal military power, like South Korea, outsourcing training to the United States, or Iraq, or Yemen soliciting help from the United States and Iran, respectively, in terms of helping them fight their proxy wars. Why is this problematic? Firstly, recognize that no country wants to do this kind of training for free. They're often asking political favors, such as political backing in other conflicts, and this oftentimes has much deeper implications for the local population, right? Whereas if these countries are hiring mercenaries, there's only an economic incentive involved. You pay them and they're out. You pay them, they do their work, and they're out of there. There's no lasting political quid pro quo within these countries, which leads to more sovereignty, more control, and more support from citizens, right? But additionally, this actually is a better option to prevent countries from developing strong political powers, because if you're going to be incentivized, because if you're hiring mercenaries, you reduce the need to conscript people from your own country, especially in positions where higher-ups are involved. Because recognize that in a lot of these countries, the reason people enter the military is to get a higher position, to gain a better life. When you outsource those positions to mercenaries, you are effectively telling people that military service isn't your one way to get out of poverty. They're less incentivized to join the military and create a military culture. So proud to propose.
Thank you for your fine speech. I'd like to invite the DLO to conclude the debate on top half.
Do you hear me well? Am I the only one who haven't heard the last 10 or 15 seconds of the previous speech?
No, I heard everything.
Okay. 1 second. So let's begin with the rebuttal. We fully agree that the mercenaries are more efficient, they are more qualified, but that's the exact problem, because we do think that international peace can be only built when you have the personal responsibilities and you don't want to spend your own soldiers just to be killed in the military actions. It means that the less you are efficient in the military actions, the more you are interested in the negotiations to provide the peace. And if you're just interested in the money, which can be given to you in case of more deaths, in cases of more violence and more destruction, that means that you will be more incentivized to cause more damage because it will bring you more money. And when they say that mercenaries have to win properly because that's their business, that's exactly the reason, because you're more interested in to cause extra damage and not to throw your people, because there will be no mercenaries and you will get no money. So you will be interested just to destroy everything around you and then just to throw your soldiers. They're saying that there will be the violation of the rights. We do think that this exists in both sides, because that's the war and that's the conditions where the rights are violated. But note that in their world, you are less incentivized to protect the rights of the mercenaries, because A, you have no personal responsibilities because you have paid money and they can do anything, just they have to realize this contract and they have to kill people, and that's all. You have no personal responsibilities. That are not your soldiers whom you have demanded to protect. And secondly, they have no protection from the international law, because the international law says that the mercenaries aren't under their protection and they have to be judged in the courts. So they will have no protection from international law, and that's the problem. And they will have more violations on their side of the house. Firstly, let's begin with the legitimacy. What is the difference between the defending national interests and why is that legal? And why are killers and murderers illegal? We do think that that's the problem of the reason. We do think that the only justified reason to start the law is when you have to defend your own national interest because you are surviving hard times and you can be destroyed as the nation. So that's the only legal reason to start the military campaigns and to protect yourself. But when you are striving to get the money and when you want to exploit these military campaigns to for your practical and utilitarian stake, we do think that's illegal. And that's the exact reason why we prohibit the killers and the murderers, why they are illegal, because that leads to the volunteer dehumanization. When you want to get the money by the means of dehumanizing you and by giving out all your rights and all your abilities as the person just by to get the money. But we do think that it's not acceptable just in level of the principle, because you cannot enslave you for the exchange of the money. You cannot sell your organs, no thank you, in case when you're probably survive that death, because we do think that all of this leads to dehumanization. In status quo, we prohibit the volunteer enslavement, selling your organs, because all of this leads to dehumanization. But in case of defending national interests, we do think that's the legal reason, so we are not prohibiting all of this. So we do think that the peace cannot be built on the commercial interest, because that always will be people who will strive to provoke, to start the battles, because that's the only ability for them to earn the money. So that's the reason why we invented the international law, why we invented the sanctions and the personal responsibilities of the states, because we give them the institute of the reputation which they have to maintain in case when they cause a lot of violence, when they start irresponsible activities and kill a lot of people, they know that they will suffer the sanctions, they will be under the international law, and they will be judged by it. So they have more incentive to stick to it, no thank you, and to give up all this violence. Note that more violence leads to more efficiency in the military actions, and the better you will be better as the company only in case when you cause more violence, because it leads to efficiency. So it means that we will have more violence overall, and we as the international society is interested in peace and less of all of these things. So if that's your source, no thank you, you're more interested to finish the campaign, to start the negotiations, because you have the personal responsibilities before your citizens. And it means that if you have a lot of losses on the military in the military campaigns, it means that your citizens will be they will not like it. And it means that if we have no responsibility before our citizens, it means that it will be less support from your citizens to finish the actions, because they understand that it's not their soldiers, it's not their own citizens, and they have nobody to protect. And note that if you have no accountability before your citizens, it means if you are more incentivized quitted from Vietnam and Iraq, is that the hippie movement evolved and they required to save the lives of their citizens. They don't want to create more damage just because the government wants. And when we have the personal responsibility of the government before their citizens, when they have this mandate, which they have to protect, it means that they will be less incentivized to throw more soldiers, to cause more damage, because all of this will lead to the inner movements which will make the government to quit and all of these things. So we basically say, no, thank you, that mercenaries can be used for sabotage, for secret actions, because you don't need, as the government, to proclaim the war officially. You don't have to be responsible for all of this because you have just paid the money and that's all. You don't have to survive all the international investigations of the sabotage and all of this secret activity. So it means that you will be more prone to start the military action because you won't be under the prosecution of the international law, and you will not survive all the sanctions and all. You will have you won't have to bring all the responsibility before your citizens. But we also think that it leads to the harm for the less developed countries, because mostly these mercenaries will be recruited from the less developed countries like Sudan, like Libya, like Somalia, and it means that we will not have to protect their rights because they're just the people from the poor countries and we have no responsibilities before them despite the money. That's the protected minute. And also they will have no guarantees from the international law in case of the captivity. So all of this means that mostly it will cause more damage to the less developed countries where most mercenaries are recruited from, and at least probably to the legal exploitations of the citizens of these countries. And we do think that it causes the international equality which can be accepted in our modern society, and just on the level of the principle that you can enslave you voluntarily and you cannot provide the legal exploitation. We do think that it's unacceptable. I beg you to oppose.
Good. Thank you for your fine speech. Let's invite the member of government to start the debate on cause and health.
Hello. Give me a moment. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm starting. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on summer battle. We heard from all we have been hearing from OO so far is about how mercenaries are going actually to do more, to violate more human rights and create even more war. Okay, first of all, horrible crimes are already committed by national armies. Okay, and those horrible crimes are not recognized by the country responsible. Even if you look at the past, for example, Turkey doesn't even recognize a certain historical fact that is about the Greek and Armenian genocide that happened about 100 years ago, that is generally recognized by everyone, right? If you just see, in India recently shot down a Pakistani plane, and still, even though the international community said, we know that India did it, India doesn't admit that it did it, right? So horrible crimes are already committed by national armies, and the countries that they are committed by don't recognize that they did it because there's no incentive for them to recognize that. Okay. Secondly, about mercenaries being anonymous and about that not creating some sort of like consequences for the country that hires them. Okay, do you seriously believe that in an era where every country has its own really developed intelligence services and every country knows who exactly is the opponent and the bad guy in every situation for that specific country, do you seriously think that they wouldn't be able to locate who actually hired those mercenaries and which country actually did those things that actually incentivized those mercenaries to do those things. We completely disagree. The third thing that we would like to point out is you said that mercenaries have more of an incentive to provoke war or to provoke certain things in order to be hired more, for example. We believe that each country is going, if a country believes that peace is more important than war and more profitable in its situation, it is going to choose peace, even if those things are provoked by mercenaries. If a country believes that war is more important than peace and more profitable in its situation, then obviously a country is going to go to war, no matter if a mercenary actually provoked something or not. So we believe that generally, no matter what mercenaries do, countries always and states have a bigger hand on how things are moved on a national level. Now, to move on to our constructive case, what you have heard from OG so far is about how hiring mercenaries is more ethical and more cheap. We are actually going, but they never said how that is going to actually reduce the possibility of war happening. And this is what we're going to explain to you, why actually hiring mercenaries is going to have a less of possibility of wars happening, which is directly classes with OO. Okay, so what are mercenaries do better? What are mercenaries doing, right? They're more trained than national forces. They need the money to survive and they do not have a steady salary that comes in and out, no matter if they actually go in a mission or not. And this is important because in many countries actually, soldiers might go and join the force without actually understanding what that entails, and without that country usually specifically being at war with a different opponent, therefore actually needed to use the skills that they had. So actually, mercenaries need to always keep their skills sharp in order to gain profit, right? Now, why is that more important? Because they are more likely to help a country succeed in a mission, right? They are more likely to create a certain leverage that usually responds to a political leverage or diplomatic leverage in order for a state to have the upper hand of a country. Now, what does that do? That creates stronger forces for each country to have. Now, mercenaries are usually give the opportunity to smaller states to actually have a strong military force, to actually have something strong to go against a bigger state. Now, could you question for one moment, why is America the only country that usually goes to smaller countries in the Middle East and attacks, and those countries usually don't provoke America first? Because America is a very strong opponent, right? And those countries don't think that they can go at war with the US and actually come out unscathed. So they're forced to do it only when the US provokes it first. What that means is that a strong opponent is an opponent that a country doesn't want to go at war with. What the mercenaries do is that they give a certain advantage to the military forces of its country, and they strengthen those forces, which means that when two countries believe that they will lose more than gain when they go at war with a different country, or when they spark those kinds of situations, then they are not likely to do it, because therefore a strong opponent creates an opponent with whom you do not want to spar with, in a way, right? Therefore, we create an environment that generally creates less wars. I'm sorry, could anyone? I think I'm okay. Sorry for the PY. I am out of time. Okay. Now, what are also mercenaries do? They are usually smaller teams, right? So no large-scale operations, no operations that actually have a big number of people involved. It's usually smaller ones, like, for example, extractions, abductions of political figures, or generally smaller targets. What does that mean? That means that even if a country is at war with a different one, it is usually done, that war, on a smaller scale, which creates smaller victims. What does that mean? That means that generally less people who shouldn't die in this war, who are then actively involved in this war, less people will actually die. So what have we proved to you so far? We have proved to you why actually with mercenaries, countries, smaller countries become countries that are more likely to be feared, therefore stronger opponents for other countries to go at. And two, less possibility of a war. And even if that war does happen, it happens on a smaller scale, therefore less victims.
Thank you. I would like to invite the member of opposition to continue the debate.
I'm audible?
I can hear you. No, I can hear you. It's very quiet.
I'm audible.
You are very quiet.
I'm trying. Wait a minute.
Maybe you could like use earphones.
I'm audible now.
Okay, one more.
I'm audible now.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Firstly, I want to start with a rebuttal from the opening government. They are said that there will be a better soldiers if we are going to hire the mercenary soldiers. Firstly, I want to tell you one thing, that the better soldiers are come from the experience. When the experienced people are expecting from him, because for example, if uh, uh, there are two armies which are going to be a war, first which have a more than experience of more than 10 years or more than 100 years, which actually have a people of more than 10 years 20 years experience, and on the other hand there is a private company who send the mercenary soldiers that do not have any experience at all, or maybe experience with a little bit experience. So in a war, the main thing is important the tactics, and due to lack of experience there might be happen that the uh, soldiers are not able to fight very strongly as they should be required. As the opening opposition, my friend has said that they are going to be less efficient. Why I'm saying this efficient, because they will be lacking in experience and they're going to be less efficient, and there is going to be more violence, because I am going to take an example of India and China. What happened recently, there is a conflict happened and more than 20 soldiers of India has died. What happens if they are not Indian soldiers and they are the mercenary soldiers, but they are actually going to the escalate the situation because the company want a profit of it a later place. And they actually want to make profit from these soldiers, and the situation of negotiation which has just been reached, they are actually the situation of negotiation is not going to be reached, and there is a full of escalation is my escalation might going to happen. And when we are going to give a private company a contract, as the deputy prime minister said, it is going to be in favor of the national security, and I am completely disagree with that, because when we are going to contract with a company which are going to be national security, which are actually going to be helping you in the fighting war, or maybe other situations. What you are doing is, what you are actually uh, contracting with private company. This might be happen that this private company might uh, sell its secret to the other company, or maybe in foreign company, or this might be going to something that going to happen, and
On
these
that
might be
point,
happen. Yeah, yes please. POI.
okay, on your bench, opening opposition conceded that mercenaries are more effective. Would you respond to the idea that effective mercenaries mean shorter wars in the long term and thus lesser deaths?
So opening opposition is also talked about less efficiency. And why, what I am talking about only the less efficiency issues, that they are actually are lacking the experience in handling the situation, which is not with the government armies. And now I'm going to talking about the private company issues. So suppose we are giving the contract to the making of the roads to a private company. This might be happen if the private company are failed to making the roads, then it will we are going to we can contact to the other company and make a new roads. So and if we are going to the in warring situations, and if these mercenary soldiers are not able to fail in that situation, then it is going to be a very problematic situation, not for only the national security but also from the people of the country. And opening government is also talked about that the mercenary soldiers life is not as important as much these soldiers. So I want to say that every life is important uh, for whether they are going to war or there is any situation. So it is
On that
not
point,
that I'm just saying that you have said that mercenary soldiers life is uh, not much important as the soldier's life important.
yes, POI.
Later, please. So I think that mercy soldiers' life is also important as much as the country's soldiers' life important. Uh, um, you cannot say that mercy soldiers' life cannot be compared as the soldiers' life, because obviously they are also the humans, and if any humans is going to be done, then it is going to be a problematic situation. Uh, or no. 1 minute, please. Uh, uh, and let's talk about the when we are going to terrorist, or when we are going to operation like terrorist organizations. Uh, what is most important is that there is not going to be leaking of the information, which is I think the most important. And if the information is get leaked, then uh, it is going to be harmful for the national security. And and we know that the mercenaries soldiers are hired from the private company, and private company work for only for the profit. And if they are going to make the profit from that from other funding organizations, and if they are able to get more money from the other organization, then these national security issues are going to be national information are going to be leaked, and there is much more damage to the national security. And there is going to be a chaos situation in the country also. I
On
just
that point,
thank you. I just
Okay, just to clarify, are you done, right?
yeah, I'm done, right.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, could you please like mute yourself? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your fine speech. I'd like to invite the whip of the government to continue the debate.
So in this debate, we discussed about three things. First of all, about ethics, secondly, about military effectiveness, and the most important, about the stronger position in international arena, and about less conflict, which was the extension of my partner. So opening half completely ignore that the reason why we need military staff is not only to like go in military conflicts and stuff like that, but it's also to protection and to avoid conflicts at all. We don't want to go that far and participate in war, we want to make a strong position and make other countries don't want to deal with us. So basically, let's see team by team what happens in this debate. Let's begin with OO. So they came here and told us that in case of war, we will have less effective soldiers because mercenaries need only money. So, but in the comparative, look what we have. In one hand, we have mercenaries, which have the interest of money, and just citizens, the normal soldiers who was forced to participate in this war, who are scared and who want just to stay alive. In this case, those people don't, maybe they don't know enough education about military stuff and they don't want to be there. So in this case, still we can to have sabotage. We still can have all these actions that the OO describes us, and we actually think that it's much more likely to achieve those bad stuff for our army if we have just normal soldiers than if we have professionals, people who their career is to protect a country and to participate in military conflicts. Their profiles is to do that, and they are not afraid to make the right decisions. Also, they just told us about all this stuff about horrible crimes in international arena. We don't think that it's easy in their case to have more crimes because we think that those mercenaries have contract with the country. So basically, we know even if those companies go and participate in this war that they do that because they represent some country and they don't do that by themselves. So we don't think that we will have less control in this stuff. No, we still have control. And you know, if we buy all this stuff about the less effective army and stuff like that, in this case, we think that we didn't have the reason why those companies exist is exactly because they are effective. If they wasn't effective, we didn't have those companies at all. So basically, I want to take a POI from opening. No POI. Okay, from closing. No POI. Good. Okay, so okay, also all told about less support and stuff like that. But as citizen, I prefer to have some mercenaries to represent me in army than to have there my son and to send him in Afghanistan to die or whatever, which is not his choice at all. So we, in every case. In every point of all, we prefer just to have some soldiers and pay them to do this stuff. But let's move now to our case, which is the most important. So what is the difference between us and the OG? The difference is that OG told us about the case in which we have war and stuff like that. What we told you is that we want to avoid that. And so basically, right now countries buy military arsenal and all those stuff, rockets and whatever, every year and spend a lot of money, even if we don't have any war and we have only peace. Why we have this in status quo? Because we want to have a good position and to look strong in eyes of other opponents. So in that case, we tend to avoid conflicts. If we have a lot of examples, as USA, as Russia, as Israel, countries which are strong military power, it's less likely that someone else goes there and just say, oh, I want to participate in war with you, even if I know that I'm less stronger like you. So we think that other countries will avoid to do that. So we think that those soldiers is pretty similar to all this military power that we buy and we caring to to have anyway. So okay. Okay, so, and this is more important than the case of OG, because even if they said about more effective wars and stuff like that, we don't want wars at all, and we think that it's much more important. In this way, we can avoid and help much people and have have less deaths. So now, what about CO? Basically, CO agrees with us at many points, because CO said that every life is important, which is actually our case. They said that national security is important, which is actually our case. They told about some very specific cases in which they said that some companies might sell secret to other companies. We don't think that's true. We think it's very specific, and so we don't think that we have to buy it and to care about that. So even if, so as we told you, in our case, you can achieve better, more peaceful society. For all those reasons, see.
Okay, thank you for your fine speech. I'd like to invite the opposition whip to conclude debate.
There is no opposition. There is no opposition.
Opposition whip, are you here? Oh, okay. Do you want to replace him and speak the whip speech? Okay, thank you for a very good debate. Give me 10 to 15 minutes and I will come back with a call. So on opening opposition, you're just providing me some examples about Russia, and just saying that look, soldiers are more accountable because just you're not providing reasons why soldiers are more accountable than mercenaries. So either and you also, what is your huge strategic disadvantage is that you're not responding the claims from the opening government about the competition, about all this stuff, right? So if they're proving the point about competition, they're probably proving that a lot of bad mercenaries or companies that provide them probably will be taken out of the market, and nobody will hire them. And stuff like that. Also, you never provide why Russia don't have incentive to punish, for example, mercenaries who are brutal at war and stuff like that. So more reasoning on this point would be very helpful to place you higher in this debate. Also, the second point on the side of the opening opposition is the prevention of wars. So you see, the problem here is that you never prove me why wars are inherently bad. This is the first point. The second point about your problem of your argumentation is that you never provide me mechanization how this rage from the society, how rage from society will lead to the to the end of war or to prevention of war and stuff like that. So you provide me some examples of Vietnam, but it's not enough. You need to provide mechanization, for example, look, if some people are dead, probably it will be really bad. People go to the protest. For politicians, protests are bad, and they will probably want to prevent them. They will probably want to please the audience, please the electorate. That's why they will probably retrieve soldiers from the Iraq, Vietnam, whatever. So this mechanization at least would give me some idea how it happens. But a lack of the mechanization also is not good for you, and you are like, even if the opening government never answers that, like they never compare or rebut that, it is also not enough to win over the opening government because of the lack of mechanization. But on opening government, we still have this staging point about how the war will be more effective, meaning that less war crimes, less brutality, and like stuff like that. Okay, any questions on this comparison?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
So we spoke about effective war as well. We talked about how mercenaries are more effective and thus wars are shorter. When we were both discussing our own performance, we think we didn't impact it well enough. Do you think that on that clash, there's anything we could like keep in mind as to why we miss impacts and how to do that better?
Okay, I feel like you spoke about the efficiency, but also you didn't provide me mechanization how exactly mercenaries are will shorten the war. You just like said the thesis, but you didn't provide it. Yeah, so it would be better to really explain how like why, for example, mercenaries, they have financial incentives, and they have like maybe they want a lot of projects, they want a lot of missions in a year. Their salary depends on directly. That's why they will have incentive to do it like faster compared to soldiers. Soldiers, they have recruited soldiers in US Army, they have constant salary, and they don't care about war being fast. Yeah, and in this case, it would be better. In this case, mechanization would be better explained. But also, I don't really understand why like short war is important. Yeah, it may be like bad because short war can bring a lot of harms. Like if you, okay, very bad analogy, but if you like drop the atomic bomb at some country, it will be very short war, right? So yeah, okay. Okay, okay, any questions on this? Okay, I feel like
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Closing government. Let's bring the closing government into the debate. Okay, so closing government compared to the opening. Let's compare first to the opening opposition. So you're like starting your extension with saying that okay, answer to the opening opposition. Look, some countries with their own army don't recognize crimes, stuff like that. But those kind of claims, it's just claims, right? You also don't provide reasons why countries don't like interfere into the why those countries are not willing to to admit the war crimes, right? So in this case, I really need some kind of logic and explanation why it is likely to do in most of the cases. So for example, like opening government provides this explanation, and they're saying that because of the image of army, because of the some ideologies, right, and because of the like electorate, stuff like that. So so you do not provide that, and in this case, it's really hard to create this rebuttal on the opening opposition. Then you're saying that probably mercenaries. Also, I forgot to. Okay, I will mention in this comparison, mercenaries are like it doesn't matter whether mercenaries will like trigger the war or not, because like countries, if they want, they probably will go to this war. If they don't want to go to this war because of the lack of resources, they won't go. I agree with that. It's a like fair rebuttal, but I feel like on the opening opposition, this point is not so important. The most important point about war prevention, yeah, and yeah, in this point of opening opposition don't work anyway, because like there is no difference. This point is not mutually exclusive, because like mercenaries exist on both sides, and on both sides they both have like financial incentive, and they can create wars on both sides. But like, how does it change when we hire them, right? So there's no kind of incentive to that. So yeah, and on closing government, I feel like this rebuttal was, and you're winning on this clash, but this clash is not that important. And the most important part of the opening opposition case is about what is it? It is about prevention of war. So on prevention of war, you're not winning on prevention of war, because your case is actually harming itself. You're saying that, look, so mercenaries are not playing a big of a role in wars. They are like doing extractions and like killing smaller targets. And you're saying for US, it's really important. It's really important not to lose their resources and their people. And if the like enemy is too big, they probably won't go for this country. But you're not explaining why mercenaries are so powerful compared to regular army. Yeah. So I don't really understand that. So in this case, I cannot credit you that. And in these cases, I cannot place you above all. And in all, the prevention of war is the most important thing. And you also agree that prevention of war is the most important thing in closing government. Any questions on this?
Yes. Well, okay. First of all, on the rebuttal part, I know that you exactly provide a mechanism on why countries don't take responsibility for their actions, but I feel like the examples that I gave were enough. As in, like, this already happens in status quo. It happens very often, and therefore, I don't think that I need to provide more of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I will say to you that on the opening opposition, they have explanation, some kind of more universal explanation about why. Okay, so what is the problem here? Yeah, with the accountability. On opening the position, they're saying that soldiers are more accountable compared to the mercenaries, right? So your point is not directly responding to that. You're not providing like counter comparative where you are explaining that mercenaries are more accountable. This OG has this material, yeah, but you're just providing me examples in status quo. Just provide me examples how in status quo, India and Turkey, they don't recognize genocides, they don't like recognize their war crimes, stuff like that. But how it will change in your world, you never explain that. So you never explain how, in case of the mercenaries, India and Turkey will recognize that. So in this case, there is like no difference, right? There is no I cannot credit you these examples because it does not contribute to the clash with opening opposition. And also I can give you like some I can give you some contra examples when like countries recognize their war crimes. Yeah, for example, Germany recognized the genocide of how is it called? The Holocaust, right? Recognize that. So why this example is more important than your example, right? Or less important?
Okay, and on the second point that you had on our case, I feel like the explanation that usually mercenaries are more efficient and are more well-trained than national armies it proved that mercenaries are generally better at their job than national armies. Was that not enough, or was that not clear?
Yeah, I heard this information, this info, but they're better trained. They're like, okay, they have more power, and the conclusion from that, you're saying that like people, like countries use them in extractions, and countries use them in in smaller operations, smaller targets, right? So I feel like it's comparing to the opening opposition, you're like explain me that you're better at preventing wars, right? But I already explained to you that at this point, right? So don't show me that like mercenaries are that big of a threat that US won't go for Iraq or for, I don't know, Vietnam or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So I agree that they're like that mercenaries are better trained. All agrees that mercenaries are better trained, but how does it contribute to your case? I cannot see that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I just had a short question. So Closing Gov based their unique extension on the fact that they prevent wars while they make wars more just, which is a very interesting extension. But what my partner and I were thinking is that the motion is about allowing states to use mercenaries in active combat roles. So we thought that if on their side, they prevent war, then this motion would never apply in the first place in the vast majority of their cases. So do you think that that's a valid criticism?
Well, I feel like you could have. I mean, in clash of between opening opposition and closing government, it is. I think it's appropriate to say that they both want to prevent wars, and this is on the basis that I've judged on. But also, if like they framed it in a way, look, if we hire mercenaries. If we like hire mercenaries, probably we could prevent some wars that are unnecessary, right? Some extra wars that are happening only because countries can't do that. Because countries.
Okay, so like you use mercenaries in one war and you ward 3 others, like that.
Yeah, something like
okay.
that. So if the framing was better, yeah. Okay.
Right, thank you.
So I feel like the comparison with the opening government is already kind of clear, but yeah, I will explain this again. So I already said that a lot of material, herbicide material was based on things that opening government already provided. And also opening government was provided me clear like explanation and a clear impact about how they will improve the war, how they will get less of a war crime. But your case, in the point when you explain things and in the point when you explain things and in the point when you provide mechanization, there's huge contradiction that does not allow you to win over the opening government, because opening government is clearer and more what does it say? Okay, so they're clear and they don't have contradictions in their case. Okay, I hope it's clear. Okay, closing opposition. So I feel like the problem of closing opposition is lack of the engagement, and you when you're engaging with the opening government, you also like similarly to with the opening opposition, you never provide like explanation and rebuttal why competition won't happen or competition is actually bad, why all this kind of stuff. So there's no response for that. Also, when you're saying that like about the experience, I feel like you're also not responding to the material of the opening government and closing government when they provide you reasoning when they provide you reasoning about the mercenaries, that mercenaries probably are very like trained very good. So opening opposition also agrees that mercenaries probably better trained than the soldiers because they are, for example, retired military service, they are police officers and stuff like that. They probably have some experience. So when you're saying that like if army exists like 100 years, it probably have more experience. It is very unclear why is it so, right? So probably like all those soldiers that are in armies do not have same experience as the like whole institution of army for the past 100 years. Yeah, so this is claim that need to be explained, because otherwise it is unclear why it happens and why mercenaries are so bad compared to the soldiers. Mm-hmm. Also, I would say that you have, as I already explained with the closing government, I feel like also you provide very good examples, but those examples are not really giving me logic and more universal logic for all countries. And in this case, I also cannot really credit that a lot. And about the leaks, I feel like also opening government, compared to the opening government, for example, yeah, your big extension, your big part of your extension is about the leaks. So compared to the opening government, I can see how they were winning, because they're providing me explanation how competition will tackle a lot of that. Because like the more like if you care about your reputation and your place on market, you probably won't leak stuff. Compared to the closing government, I'd say that because closing government provides me this explanation about how mercenaries provided only like small tasks, or they extract someone or do something very small, probably they won't have so big of an impact. So leaks are not that important, so they hugely mitigate your case. And compared to the opening opposition, I would say that you never provide me the reasoning why leaks are more important than prevention of wars. So yeah, so probably, and even intuitively, I don't feel that leaks are so much important than prevention of wars. That's why also you need to explain this a little bit further. Any question on comparisons connected with CO? Okay, I feel like I've taken a lot of your time. If you were willing to receive some maybe personal feedback, contact me in VK. I'm Elina Murueva in VK. I am Elina Murueva in Facebook, or you can contact me on Discord. Yeah.
Could you enter your like contact in the chat?